History: the Mycenaeans' flipped classroom. The Mycenaeans were an ancient people who drew their origins from Achaeans, a warrior population from the north that came to Greece and formed a powerful city-state kingdom. There is, however, another hypothesis, according to which Mycenaean civilization developed through an evolution of the Mediterranean peoples who were already in Greece. Between 1600 BC and 1200 BC, the Mycenaeans experienced their heyday. Several cities were founded, including Pylos and Tiryns, but the most famous is certainly Mycenei, whose many remains have come down to the present day, and you can see it in reconstruction here. Mycenei consisted of a very mighty, cyclopean city wall. There were quarters reserved for the upper classes, a cultural center, a warrior's vase house, a circle of tombs, the celebrated Lion's Gate, houses and alleys, an area where there was a cistern for water reserves, and finally an artisan's quarter, reserved specifically for artisans who were considered a valuable resource. The mighty walls of Mycenei are tangible evidence of the warrior nature of the Mycenaeans, who were very different from the inhabitants of Crete, the so-called Minoan civilization. However, there are commonalities. Certainly the nature of the two civilizations is very different. In fact, the Mycenaeans were a warrior people, while the Cretans were a fundamentally peaceful people. In fact, the palace at Knossos lacks defensive walls, whereas Mycenaean cities were true fortified citadels of antiquity. These wealthy warriors were also skilled traders, through trading in metals and precious objects. The Mycenaeans built their trading power and opened several trade routes in the Mediterranean, Asia Minor, the Italic Peninsula, and even to Egypt. Despite the profound diversity in nature of Mycenaean and Minoan civilization, however, there were similarities. For example, the palace played a key role for both cultures and had a large courtyard called Megaron. Mycenei also had a large palace that was surrounded by warehouses and servants' quarters. And we see the composition of the building in its main elements. Within the Grand Palace, there were areas used for religious worship as well. In Mycenei, there was a neighborhood inhabited entirely by artisans, whom the king made live inside the walls. In fact, artisans were considered a valuable resource and therefore enjoyed greater protection. As mentioned above, Mycenaean society was a purely military society. However, there were cultural centers such as this one in Mycenei, which were real cultural and spiritual gathering places. Painting was certainly influenced by Minoan painting. Scenes of daily life and animals were the main subjects in both Minoan and Mycenaean painting. The ruler was called Wanax, who held the highest position in the hierarchical ladder along with a military leader, called Lawagetas. Below the Vanax and Lawagetas were Iaquetas, a military aristocracy, while for political matters there was a council of elders. The peasants usually lived outside the walls, where there were villages called demi. Each village had a chief who was called basileus. Religious functions depended on the wanax, so in Mycenaean society, there was a close link between political power and religious power. In this way, the wanax was in the eyes of the peasants a chosen one of the gods. The land belonged to the higher social classes, and within Mycenae, the aristocracy was concentrated in a definite neighborhood that probably must have been near the cultural center, and not too far from the inner circle of tombs, Circle A, near the walls in which several artifacts and precious objects were found, including the celebrated golden mask known as the Mask of Agamemnon. A large grain store was located nearby in the very vicinity of this grave Circle A. The circle of tombs inside the walls was located near the famous entrance to Mycenae, in which lions, the Lion's Gate, can still be found today. It is another famous symbol of Mycenae and Mycenaean civilization. Mycenae had at least 2 other entrances, but this entrance is certainly the most famous. The column between the 2 lions represents the authority of the Mycenaean palace. Lions should be the symbol of the city. The lintel supports the sculptures and is 4.5 meters long. The door is both elegant and majestic. The Mycenaean script, Linear B, consisting of 89 signs, could be deciphered. It represents an archaic form of Greek. The linear of the Cretans, however, is still difficult to interpret. Here we see instead the tomb of Clytemnestra. This type of burial was very expensive and also took a year to complete. In fact, the entrance was decorated with valuable paintings, columns, and reliefs. But let's look specifically at one of these tombs, the tomb of Agamemnon. These burials bear conventional names often referring to the myths of the classics. Let us raise for a moment the cover of Agamemnon's tomb, which was formed by an earthen mound that served to protect the inner structure in order to study its details and features. The access corridor is called the dromos and was about 36 meters long. The vault was a false dome formed by blocks placed in concentric rows, called the Tolos tomb. There was an entrance precisely is the main chamber that was located just below the dome. In addition, there were also secondary rooms. Let us now enter Agamemnon's tomb. Look at the ceiling of the mock dome protected outside by the earthen tumulus. And here is the tomb that contained the ruler's body and treasure, called the Treasure of Atreus. The circular floor plan was very spacious. Inside there was also a small 6 square meter chamber used for funerary rites. Atreus gives the tomb treasure its name, and he was Agamemnon's father. Mycenaean religion was polytheistic, and they worshipped the same gods that many centuries later were worshipped in classical Greece. Zeus, Ares, Dionysus, and Poseidon were some of these revered gods. After the conquest of Crete in the 13th century BC, the Mycenaeans probably reached their apogee, but it was a short-lived period. In fact, the end of Mycenaean civilization came shortly thereafter, following the invasion of the Dorians in the 18th century BC. And certainly violent earthquakes also contributed to the weakening of Mycenaean civilization. The collapse of Mycenaean civilization ushered Greece into its darkest ancient period, the so-called Hellenic Middle Ages, which would end in the 8th century BC, with the advent of the first Greek polis. During this period, the Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were composed, in which the Mycenaean world and its characters made up of kings and valiant warriors are often described. Video created and illustrated and animated by Flipper Professor Marco Mellace. Thank you for the visualization.